Hello, everybody. This is Rob Thompson live with our next guest, Mike Taramykin. Did I get that right?
Taramykin, close enough.
Taramykin. Darn it. So you're the founder and CEO, president of, you want to say Hype Sports?
Hip Sports.
Hype Sport. See, why didn't I ask you all this before we get on this call? I meant to.
Perfectly fine to, answer as we go.
To make corrections as we go. Well,
that's right.
I wanted to thank you again for coming on. We spoke briefly before, but I just want to tee this up and make it for my listening audience to get to know a little bit about who you are. And for me, I'm excited about it because you were behind some of my favorites. Sports at games at EA which was arena football, which is something I was involved with as a general manager. So I was excited to see that part of it. But why don't you take it back, Mike, from the beginning? Where did it all start for you in this space?
That is a great question, and I've been in sports and video games for a really, really long time. So I'll try to be complete but brief. Honestly, it started for me right out of college. I graduated University of Buffalo in the early '90s, and it was kind of just as technology was really starting to take off, and things that used to take big, huge computers, you could suddenly do on home PCs. And so I started kind of like a freelance business in New York, doing animation for TV commercials, which used to involve an entire process, and I was kind of doing them all just on my PC. And that business, started to really grow quickly, and so I recruited a couple of guys that I knew from school to help out. And somewhere in our first year, we just decided that, we really wanted to get involved with interactive media, not just, animation and stuff like that, just for film and television, but we really were excited about what was going on with just interactive, the interactive area in general. And so, before long, that led us right into, hey, why don't we just go make games? And it was really that simple. It was really just we kind of messed around with some stuff that was interesting to us in tech, and settled on, video games as an area that we really liked. I mean, we were all essentially 23 at the time. And so the thought was, let's try to make video games for a living. And then when we fail at it, we'll go get real jobs. And so we started a company called Hypnotics at the time. And that, that quest for, let's do this until we fail, ended up lasting 12 years. And in the process, we had gone from, starting with PC games to console games, Xbox, PlayStation, stuff like that, and really started to find kind of our specialty as being sports. Except we always had a flair for humor, I think, as well. And so, we created golf games where all the golfers were, convicts and rappers and things like that. So we made great games with a sense of humor. And then, including, one of our surprise hits was a hunting game, where the deer hunted the people instead of the other way around. And that, believe it or not, was probably the most commercially successful game we made to date at that point.
I remember that. Yes, I remember that game.
Yeah. That's right. So, and then in 2005, we actually sold that business to Electronic Arts, to EA Sports, and moved the entire team, or most of the team, down to Orlando, Florida, to work on, ultimately to work on the Tiger Woods golf franchise. So that game was being made out of California. EA wanted to move it to Florida, and so essentially bought our company to be able to develop it here locally. Although between Hypnotics and Tiger Woods, there was, like you mentioned, there was arena football. So the very, very first project that I worked on when I got to EA was running the AFL game, which we made two versions of, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun because I got to learn all about arena football and
Mm-hmm.
and kind of dive right in, right off the bat. And so when, and by the way, let me know if this is the right amount of detail or if you have any follow-ups. I don't
No,
need to kind of keep.
no, no. This is perfect. Keep going.
All right, great. So I got to EA in 2005. Very excited to just kind of dig in and start working on some really big franchises. It was very exciting to kind of take over the golf business when we did, because it was just as the transition was kind of happening to Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, I believe. So it was really like this whole console transition period, and so everything was just big. And so taking over the golf business to us was super exciting because we had done golf games before, but we always had to come up with imaginary players and things like that. And now we were working with Tiger Woods, the PGA Tour, all the top golfers in the world. Having access to all the best golf courses, so we can go out and we bought a laser scanner so we could scan them all to within like 6 millimeters of accuracy. We had guys on our teams flying around the world just scanning golf courses. So really, really exciting. And I ran that franchise, me and my team, for 8 years. But somewhere along the way, also got incredibly interested in what was going on with free-to-play games, which now is very common because that's the way mobile games work. That's why mobile games, kind of the business model behind mobile games. But before the iPhone, there were a lot of free-to-play games being very successful in Asia. And to us, it seemed, fascinating that, companies can make more money by giving their products away than some of us could by selling them at retail. And so this was incredibly interesting. And so we started incorporating certain microtransactional elements to first our console games. And then I want to say somewhere around maybe 2009-ish or so, especially as Facebook started taking off as a gaming platform, got really excited about bringing some of the bigger EA Sports IPs to free to play. And that, meant Madden, essentially taking the Madden football game, first releasing it on Facebook as a free to play game, and then ultimately releasing it also on mobile. As a free to play game, as opposed to what it was at that point, which was $4.99 purchase. So towards the end of my time at EA, I was running the golf business, plus I was running a free to play business unit within the company that was kind of focusing on new platforms and things like that, and how do we bring our IP universe to these new platforms and figure out how to build a business there. After EA, I had left, and with most of the team, actually most of the original team that founded Hypnotics with me, and we had moved to Zynga, which was all about free to play, all about social gaming, but it was really to try to build a sports business unit within that company. And I'll try to kind of wrap it up a little bit. And then after Zynga, our team had also almost as a group moved to a company called FanDuel, which was a fantasy sports company that was that was in the not free to play. Sorry, that was in the daily fantasy space. It was a startup. It was really, really kind of successful, and so it seemed for a number of years it really kind of focused on sports as a kind of in the fictional simulated world of sports, where at EA and at Zynga we really strive to make games that were as close to the real thing as possible. But then moving over and working at a fantasy sports company, what we realized is that sometimes the real thing is it is just as engaging and entertaining as creating like these simulated fictional worlds. So it was really fun to kind of work in fantasy sports and really see the similarities between the simulated gaming world of sports and the real world based world of fantasy sports. And, you know, and then that was, I think, when the light bulb went off for myself and for the, you know, my other founders. And what we realized was that, you know, when you work in fantasy sports, when you work in games, you really, the one common thread between them was really the consumer was essentially the same exact person.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy that played Madden also, played fantasy sports. You know, he also watched football on television. So what you realized was there was really this consumer out there that was consuming sports in a different way, in a way that they hadn't before. And the light bulb for us was like, well, what if we could take all of the engagement and frankly monetization mechanics of gaming, but apply it to live sports. Remove the gambling and wagering component of it, keep it entertainment, but really use real life as the game engine, and then but still build all those other engagement mechanics like collecting your team, building up your players, doing all of that kind of stuff that you do in games. Can we apply that to live events? And that's when we founded Hip Sports, or Hip Games is the company, and then Hip Sports is our first app, which kind of takes all of our background and all of our experiences and puts it together into what we think is an innovative new engagement platform for sports fans that takes the gameplay mechanics of games plus the real life excitement of sports and kind of puts it together into one app. And then not only focusing on one sport at a time, it's kind of across the entire global world of sports. So in our product, even though we have a kind of new way to play fantasy football and basketball and hockey and et cetera, they're actually all connected. So things that you do in your fantasy football team get you virtual items that you could spend on your fantasy basketball team or on your fantasy hockey team, and vice versa. And what that does is it allows users to try a whole bunch of new sports because they're incentivized to do it, because they get something out of it. And then they start playing. And then when the season ends for the sport they started in, they still have a pretty kick-ass team in a different one, and so they continue playing. And so we've managed to turn fantasy sports into a real year-round experience by being able to move players from sport to sport in a fairly natural and organic way.
So how is this platform disrupting the marketplace between the DraftKings, FanDuels of the world, and kind of replacing that element? Or like where do you guys see this fitting in?
It's funny. I use the word disruption a lot too, but I don't think that what we do is necessarily hurts anybody else. Mm-hmm. I think the innovation of it is that there are people out there right now. There's a lot of gamers. I mean, a large percentage of fantasy players also play games. And when I say large, I mean like almost all of them.
Right.
So, there are already guys that are playing, mobile football games and playing daily fantasy football and have 5 season-long fantasy football leagues that they're in. So, as when it comes to sports fans, it's just, the appetite is actually quite ravenous.
Right.
And so what we do is we create, another way for gamers or, for users to, engage with the teams and the athletes that they love. And at the same time, make a competition out of it. So I don't, the same way that I don't think Madden Mobile disrupts daily fantasy or season long disrupts, daily fantasy. I think it's the same way, we create another way for fans to play along and engage. But the way it kind of helps is that, we're taking a lot of mechanics and a lot of sensibilities that fans are already familiar with. So we have a lot of players that play our game that basically tell us that, straight up, it's like, hey, I'm also playing, NHL Ultimate Team. I'm also playing FIFA Ultimate Team. This is, I do this, between breaks of DraftKings or FanDuel. And so it's just part of, it's part of the suite of interactive products that fans can enjoy.
I think you said one thing before. It seems like this is an evergreen year-round program where a lot of fantasies is just such a seasonal thing. Do you find that there's a lot of crossover between multiple sports with guys? And
yeah. So for us, once people start playing on our platform, about 85% of our engaged users, which means they played for about a week or so, play every sport that we offer. Mm-hmm. And that includes esports. So you'll have people that are playing League of Legends fantasy that are also playing European soccer, that are also playing MLB baseball. And so the crossovers are pretty interesting, especially when you look at demographics where these are real examples where we've got a player who's a 77-year-old soccer fan in the U.S. who's also playing fantasy League of Legends because it's a great way to get extra coins so he can get Messi on his team. And it goes the other way too. A lot of our players that download our app and play it for esports that are based in Europe come in, and before you know it, they're following along with NFL football because again, it's a great way to add Bjergsen or Cloud9 to their fantasy esports lineup. But then what we do in the app is we then create, we have a whole chat system within the app where everybody talks to everybody else that they're competing against. And so they end up kind of helping each other where, the guy who doesn't know anything about esports is getting advice, the 77-year-old soccer fan in the US is getting advice from like a 22-year-old esports fan in Europe about who the players are, and vice versa. And it's really an amazing ecosystem when we add kind of that communication layer to it. So the reason people play multiple sports, frankly, is because it's in their best interest because they get a lot of coins that they can spend on getting, building up their rosters. But more importantly is because, there's other players there that are helping them do it, and it becomes more of a social experience.
Talk about esports a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And from your perspective, and I know it's like the wild, wild west right now and out there.
Sure.
And what's your perspective on esports and the future of it?
It's interesting. I mean, I have like where if I'm optimistic or if I kind of, as a gamer, I kind of look at it and I say, ooh, here's where it can go. But I think a lot of it needs to be proven over the next, couple of years. I think right now esports is just, it's phenomenal promise. I think it's probably some of the most, geographically diverse audience for sports. I think they kind of use technology, whether it's, Twitch or just the games that they play. I think they're basically redefining how sports and tech come together. And, in my kind of view is I think, look, anytime people compete and a whole bunch of other people want to watch it, that's a sport. Right. That fits the criteria. So I think esports over the next couple of years is going to grow. How big will it get is a good question. I don't think it's a matter of interest in terms of how big it can grow. I think it's going to be a matter of fragmentation. I think, it is very easy for new games to come on the scene right now. And once they come on the scene, the audience starts to kind of break apart. So with traditional sports, you kind of have your NFLs, NBAs, MLBs that have just, they've kind of weathered the storm and have risen to a, kind of this evergreen league. And then you have a lot of secondary, sports and leagues, and then a lot of like even lower than that. I think within esports right now, there's a couple of dominant players. But there's a lot of people that want to be the next League of Legends or the next Counter-Strike or, Overwatch, great example of somebody that's really, coming on the scene now. And what I'm curious about is how does this kind of, because if you use games as the parallel, is all of these new esports coming on the scene, how do they all live together? Is there enough audience for like literally every single game wants to be the next League of Legends? And that's not going to be possible. There's not enough people to support that. So how is that all going to shake out? I think that's going to be the real determining factor. If you can get a couple of, marquee leagues out there that will continue to grow, that'll be great. If it starts to fragment where everybody kind of stays the size that they are, but there just becomes more and more of them, I think it'll become harder for it to grow. But that's the real, wait and see. In the meantime, we're psyched as hell about it. We think it's awesome. We think, the fact that there are enough, really kind of marquee esports leagues right now, that there are marquee teams and players, means for us, it's a great opportunity to kind of gamify it all, to wrap a game around that. So if right now there's an audience for a League of Legends, if there's an audience for for like a Counter-Strike or a Dota, then what we want to do is we want to bring this, this kind of like engagement platform to those audiences. Whether that becomes like 50 games in the future, we'll see.
I have so many other questions that I could go. We could talk just about esports for an hour, but let's take a step back. What's your business model?
Microtransactions.
Gotcha.
So, our business model is the same one that is essentially driving the $60 billion mobile games market right now, which is the game is our platform is completely free to play. You can join, you download the app, you could play, download it for free, play for free. As soon as you start, you pick a sport, whether it's, hockey or basketball. Right off the bat, we're going to give you a bunch of players for your fantasy team. So you don't draft them the way you would do in traditional fantasy. There's no wagering or anything like that involved. As soon as you start, we give you a whole bunch of players, and you could start, making lineups that day with the players that you've been given. And then if you come back every 2 hours, we give you a new player. If you come back every 8 hours, we give you an even better player. And as you play and win, you earn coins, and you can use those coins to upgrade your players, or purchase or draft other players to add to your team. So you can play completely for free. But the big thing with free to play games is that you have to kind of really put in the time to be able to get all the best stuff. But if for some reason you don't want to put in the time, or if you want to get stuff a little bit sooner, you could always just purchase items directly in the app. So again, no different than buying an extra life in Candy Crush, or buying a player pack in Mad Mobile. We do the same mechanics. So if you want to build your team faster, if you want to level up your players faster, you could always just make you could just buy them through microtransactions.
Sponsors work their way into this platform at some point?
Eventually. Yeah, I think when it makes sense. The thing for us is we like to think we're a small company with a huge idea. And it's really about, gamifying live sports and turning it into a year-round, microtransactional revenue opportunity for us and for our partners, whether they be teams or sponsors or leagues. But we're at a stage where we need to kind of prove all the component parts. Right now, our main focus is on, hey, have we built, a platform and a game that people want to visit and play? And if they do, are they actually going to be compelled to, spend money to the point where we can afford to sustain the business? And then the next step for us is going to be, which by the way, both of those have been, overwhelmingly positive responses. So I say yes to both. We've built something that fans like, and we can build a business out of it. And so our next step now is going to be, well, how do we scale that, and how do we grow that? And so I think things like partnerships, whether it be with teams or leagues or sponsors, is really the next phase for us. So to answer your question is like, yes, it's going to be critically important, but we're working up to it.
One step at a time. How many users do you have?
We've got about 20,000 playing every month.
That's pretty good. That's really good. And I think
it is. And the interesting part is that we're doing something different. And so the interesting thing about it is we've taken mechanics and features from products that sports fans are familiar with, but we've assembled them in a different way. And so, what we also believe in is that, you need to test everything with real consumers. So,
Mm-hmm.
you need to put a product out there, and even if it still has missing pieces, you're better off, putting it in front of people and seeing how they respond, versus, trying to wait until everything is perfect, then putting it out and realizing, oh crap, we missed a couple of points, way back. And we could have, probably ends up costing us, months, that we could have been improving on it. And so what we find is when we put it out, there's this sort of level of like, when people start playing, some of them just get it, like just right away. They're like, oh, it's just like this game plus this, I totally get it. Other ones are like, wait, I don't understand. I play fantasy. How do I do blah, blah? And that's perfectly natural. But since we've put in stuff like chats, since we've really promoted our player community, on social media and stuff, is you very quickly have like current players coming in and starting to explain that. And it's just awesome to watch, because then the pickup becomes so much faster.
They're helping each other out, learn the shortcuts.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing about sports is, it really is like, regardless of who your team is, you can be like rivals, but still kind of like, get along and hang out. We like to think of ourselves really as like a digital sports bar. The real kind of, phrase we use is it's a next gen sports platform built on competition amongst fans. It's a little wordy, but really what we want to do is we want to create like this place where sports fans hang out, and compete every single day. And so that's happening. So we're super happy about that.
So what's next? What's the next features that you guys are working on? Sports that you have that you're adding into the platform?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've added probably we've added all the I will call them traditional sports that I think we need. We have soccer, we have NFL football, hockey, basketball, baseball. Forget something? I'm like sitting here thinking, did I forget one of them? Probably not. And then we also have League of Legends. And so I think next, from a content standpoint, is we absolutely have to add a bunch more esports. Because while we've always had this approach of like it's sports and esports, I think one of the more important things for us to do is to make sure that we hit that we have content that is relevant around the world and throughout the year. And so, we ended up kind of focusing on the core sports to make sure that we have, soccer in Europe, that we have, an NFL football in the US, that we have basketball and hockey to kind of span, all the way from October to June, and then we have baseball that kind of covers the summer months. And so, like with that kind of mission accomplished, we need to now start supplementing, the additional, sports and leagues that we're interested in, and a lot of those are just esports leagues. And so, we want to very quickly start adding additional esports games to our platform. On a feature perspective, our next kind of phase of development is really going to be focused on creating and building the kind of features that grow community and really generate organic growth for our platform. That means people incentivizing them to bring their friends in, letting them create their own teams and groups within the app so they can cooperate on trying to win some of the prizes that you normally have to do on your own, that you can team up with your friends to do it, so that frankly we can create rivalries between groups. That's we wanted that from day one.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get 5 friends together, and I want to go beat up on other groups of 5 friends. But I think as a theme, the focus really is on creating daily events for large groups of people to play every single day. letting people create groups so they don't have to play on their own. They can, play with friends, both cooperatively and competitively. And then also just creating, continuing to build out the social platform that's within the app right now, letting people chat, letting them friend each other, letting them just sort of communicate and interact more easily. And then having all the gameplay that we do just sort of supplement that. So the games we do really gives people a reason to show up every day and interact with each other. But it's really about creating the tools that allows them to organize and communicate. That's our next phase. That's what we need to build, going forward.
So you mentioned building and I know the production, the back end, and you also talked a lot about your team at HIP. And it seems like you guys go back a long way together.
Yes.
And I even hear rumors that you even went to college together with a lot of these folks.
Yeah, well, certainly not rumors, but the five of us went to University of Buffalo together, and and then we started our first company together, and then we sold it and all moved to EA, then all went to Zynga, then all went to FanDuel, and it was funny because as soon as right when we sold our first company, the deal we made with each other was okay. Nobody really wants to go work for anybody, so let's give it like 2 years, learn everything we can, and then get right back at it and do it ourselves. And then what we found is we really enjoyed working at EA. We really enjoyed, then working at Zynga, working at FanDuel. We really enjoyed working at, at established companies that were, kind of well respected in the industry, and had a lot of like creative opportunities. But at the end of the day, it was really like we really were more interested in just sort of innovating and creating new things in the market, and that ultimately led us to say, like, we said we'd give it 2 years. It turned out to be like 10. So, right. but how do we kind of go build something that's our own again? And the way naturally we did it is we've always been keen on building like this tight team of people who all know each other really well, and we can kind of cut to the chase on the work and who does what. And so besides the five of us, there's an additional there's roughly an additional 10 people or so, of which I would say 8 or 9 at least go back as far as EA.
Wow.
So there's really kind of like this tight group of us that that have worked together through multiple companies. I didn't necessarily go to college with them, but it's still a damn long time ago.
Right.
That we've been working together, and so we've been able to put together a small team that can do a lot quickly. Mainly because everyone's really good, but more importantly, it's because we all know each other really well and work together in multiple organizations, and so we can be remarkably agile as well as effective.
It's just amazing that you guys have been together that long through all those different transitions, and I'm sure it hasn't been easy. But when you have friendships that you can rely upon, and you just don't see that today. You don't see people staying together as long as you guys have. So that's a testament to you.
Because I think it all started, with this sort of concept of like, hey, here's an exciting opportunity. Let's go do this together and see how far we can get as a group. And if we, and if it doesn't work, oh well, at least you did it with your friends. And and it's always been sort of like that philosophy of like, look, we're going to go into some uncharted territory, and there's going to be a whole bunch of new things that are going to make us individually uncomfortable, but we've all worked together. And so we'll always have sort of like that familiarity with the team and with each other. And so even though it's a different company, even though it's a different, business, you're still surrounded by people you're familiar with. So you can very quickly kind of get to doing what you do, and you don't have to, sort of spend time as an individual kind of acclimating to, to new things, and then eventually kind of come out of your shell and do your thing. For us, it was like, even though we were no longer in New Jersey, even though we were no longer making, hunting parodies, and even though we were working on these, big, sports franchises, we're still surrounded by the same group of people. So we were able to just kind of, really just get down to work. And
Awesome.
I think that's really the big value in all this, is that
Yeah.
every new move is really just a continuation and not like a start and stop.
Everybody has, was it a natural progression of everybody kind of has their own role? Was it just kind of feeding into each other's skill sets, or I mean, what was the transition of that? You kind of jump into each new adventure
Sure.
kind of in the same seat, or
Yeah, kind of. I mean, and I think that developed over time. When we just started, it was like everyone just did everything, but some people were better at certain things than others.
Mhm.
So, but I think as we kind of evolved, we really got into more of like specialties, to where, our CTO, I mean, his area is obviously just technology engineering, and making sure that, we're growing our engineers to make sure that they're getting better as well. I think my focus has always been on, business opportunities, kind of like places in the market where innovation, is, can succeed. And then I think, one of the guys on the team is just, is really organized. So,
right?
so he's obviously the project manager.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, we've really kind of all built into kind of our strength, where, I think big picture, some of the other guys really kind of focus on the day to day.
Hmm.
Some are focused on the design, some are focused on the, on the technology, and that translates to the entire team, actually,
Hmm.
because, it is a small team. So it works out really well, I think, for everybody, because what ends up happening is, even though the team is small, everybody has their area that they're good at, because that's the thing that they do better or faster than anybody else on the team. But because the team is small, you're seldom pigeonholed in just doing that, because there was always a need for something else. So even though this is someone's specialty, sometimes they just need to chip in somewhere else. So you get this great kind of synergy between subject matter experts and still the need to learn new things all the time, which is, I think, ultimately what we all want in our careers. Is we want to be good at something, but we don't want to become stagnant. And so, in an organization like ours, where we all kind of know each other, it's real easy for us to give people authority over certain areas. But because the team is not big, sometimes we're like, hey, you got to go learn this new thing, so go do it. And I think it's a great balance, that you don't really get as the organization gets bigger. You become a little bit more, just really focused on kind of your one thing.
Right. So what's the long-term plan for you guys, or maybe even just the short term, when you look at Hip Games? What other areas that are of interest to you guys outside of the sports, side of it?
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I actually think, focusing on sports is a very, very conscious choice, because we think, the entire sports industry is going through a transformation right now, and you kind of see it everywhere. Whether it's, focus on TV ratings or demographic changes, or whether it's like, well, what's the impact of esports on traditional sports? I think that whole area is going through a massive transformation. Meanwhile, professional sports is on literally every day of the year. And there's like probably half the Earth's population is interested.
Hmm.
So you've got billions of people interested in something that happens every single day, that is undergoing probably one of the biggest transformations that it's had in, recent history.
Hmm.
And it reminds me a lot of what happened in video games about 10 years ago, where it really went from, we sell discs at retail to we give away products that people download directly to their phones.
Hmm.
And in that process, in that transformation, the game industry is stronger than it's ever been, even though, more than half of its revenue is generated through business models that didn't exist, 7 or 8 years ago. Well, didn't exist. I mean, they existed, but they certainly were not mainstream. And so I think the same exact thing is going to happen in sports. And so I think the big opportunity for a company like ours is to really kind of pave the way to where is fan consumption going? What are the new business models that you can use in sports that talk directly to fans digitally every day, globally, monetize them not through advertising or just merchandise sales, but microtransactions, giving them content that they want to consume, but having them pay for it as they deem fit. Giving them everything they want for free, but having them, upgrade if they want something a little bit faster. I think the sports industry is going to probably undergo a similar transformation that games did. We want to be there first. We want to lead the way. And I think ultimately that's kind of where our business goes, is to really, at some point perhaps getting acquired again by somebody that is, in the space now, has an established, business, but recognizes that it's transforming, and is looking for like what's where's this industry going in the next 10, 15 years, and then sees us as like, I think they might be onto something.
Well, you took my last question away. Was where do you see this as far as an M&A, or are you guys bootstrapping this right now, or?
We're bootstrapping. Well, we started by bootstrapping. We have, we've had a couple of early stage investors, outside investors, that are helping us, kind of prove out everything. I think we're going to look to, continue to bring in new investors, and as we kind of build out the platform. But the interesting thing about M&A is I've been on the other end of M&A deals. Where we've looked at buying companies, and a lot of times, at least in my experience, the major reason in technology why you buy, well, I don't want to say just technology, but one of the major reasons that I've seen, at least in the entertainment world, of why you buy other companies is because they figured out what you should have figured out by now. And they've done it. They've gone out, they've taken the risk, and they've created the thing that makes perfect sense for your business. And that's kind of the way we look at what we do. Is we looked at the whole market and we said, look, where are the major players in sports going to need to be in the next couple of years? How do we get there first? Mm-hmm. How do we demonstrate that it works, and that we know something? And then, and then how do we ultimately, go join them?
Right. I love it. I think, you educated me on this. I could look at the deck 100 times and I wouldn't have been able to pick up everything about the bigger picture until I had this conversation. Yeah. Until you had to be on the podcast with me. So,
well, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I think, it's what I have found over the last, year or two that we've been, talking to potential partners and investors, is I realize that, when you're trying to create something that doesn't exist already, you spend most of your time explaining to people what you're not. Mm-hmm. You're sort of like, well, is it a game? No. Well, is it, fantasy sports? Well, not really. And you're kind of like, you're spending all this time being like, well, is it this? Well, no. But at the end of the day, really what we have is something that's, that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's really about where is fan engagement going in the next 5 to 10 years? What is the sports fan, of 2020 going to look like? What are the products that they're going to consume look like? And the truth is, we don't have to wait that long to see, because we have plenty of examples of where that exact fan is right now with other things that they're consuming. It's essentially like, well, what are 20-year-olds doing now? That was different a few years ago than it is now. And so just thinking of it, rolling forward is, well, the same paradigms are going to apply to all entertainment, frankly. But sports happens to be our specialty. And so we look at it and say, what's the consumer of the next 5 to 10 years going to look like? What are the products that they're going to be engaging with? What kind of business models are going to be driving those businesses? And let's just get started now. Let's get there first. Let's lead the way. And so, like I said, we're a small company with a really big idea.
Was a lot of it just, obviously you guys have been in this space for so long and you understand it so well. And when you looked at something like this, was there that aha moment when you're really analyzing consumer behavior, where the attention is, where the focus is? Was this something that, there's a moment of, this is going to connect the dots between X and Y? And
I would say there's a series of those.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the end of that question? I jumped in too soon.
it was probably irrelevant too. you know.
No, no. I mean, well, I've had probably a string of aha moments,
Mhm.
and they've all been kind of to component parts. I mean, so there was one, there was a series of insights, I would say, having worked in other game companies, where we would bring in users and ask them why they play our games and then why they stop playing our games. And this is, we did this at every company I worked at. And what you would always find is on the game side, users play a game and then they stop playing because, the controls keep changing. And when the controls change, I can't be competitive and I can't win anymore. So I just stop playing because I don't have time to learn all the new controls. In fantasy, it was like, well, because I drafted my team and I drafted poorly, and by the third or fourth week of the NFL season, it was clear I was not going to win. And so, if I can't win, I don't want to play. The same thing obviously happens with daily fantasy, where people, essentially bet, and after a while, they're like, wow, I'm losing a lot more than I'm winning. So they kind of get that thing in their head. And what we realize about sports fans is that sports fans are incredibly engaged when they think they can win.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so for us, it was like, it had nothing to do with like graphics or money or any of those kind of like all the component parts of the individual businesses that we were in. It was really like this deep sort of need to be competitive and to kick ass, and to really, and to win. And as soon as they felt like they can't win, they weren't interested anymore. And so that was like the first one. And so what we found with, working on some games at EA is it was more about building and crafting your team than it was actually playing. And what we found in fantasy was kind of the same thing. It was really about putting together that lineup. And so there was kind of this aha about how do you like kind of gamify the crafting of your perfect fantasy team, and how do we borrow things like, from games as opposed to the heavy stat driven organized way of fantasy. So that was probably the first one. And we said, I bet you if we built a game mechanic around acquiring players every single day, you would not have people quitting after a couple of weeks because they're always getting better players. They're always upgrading their players. And we found that absolutely worked. I think the other aha moment that we had was, we were really kind of worried about how do we replace our football audience with a baseball audience, with a soccer audience, to keep people playing throughout the year. And what we found was, as we added more and more sports, we had more and more things that were happening every single day. And so now the transition from the I'm a fantasy football player to I have a fantasy basketball team and I have a fantasy hockey team just sort of happened organically. We didn't have to really push it all that hard because, we incentivized it obviously with like sharing an economy, but just this natural instinct for sports fans to be like, hey, look, if it's free and it doesn't cost me anything and I might actually get something out of it, sure, I'll play fantasy basketball. And by the way, or I'll play fantasy hockey. And by the way, can someone tell me who the good players are? Because I don't know anything about hockey, but I'll play it. And we would get a lot of feedback, directly from our users and in some of our reviews even, that said, I've never followed hockey before, but now I'm watching, the Kings game tonight because of your app. And, and so the aha for us was really, sports fans are fans of all sports. They just don't know all the players yet. Once they know who the good players are, it doesn't matter if it's esports or hockey or soccer or football. They are equally engaged once they start realizing this LeBron guy is way better than anybody else, or hey, Ovechkin is better than others. And so once they start, or Reckless or Bjorkson, which are League of Legends players, once they start realizing who the stars are and who the good teams are, that natural instinct of like, I know how sports works, I know who the underdog is. I know who the greatest of all time is. And once that kicks in, it's incredibly transferable. And not only from a sort of calendar perspective, but globally, the fact that you can get people that don't speak, we could have players that don't speak any English following Major League Baseball, I think is actually amazing. And the reason that they do it is not because of anything else other than that our product is really a big collection mechanic. And once they start collecting players and realizing who the stars are, they just become interested. They just follow them. If every day they look at the scores and they see, hey, this Verlander guy's putting up a lot of fantasy points, he must be good. Then that whole thing of you just become a fan of that sport because now you start to know who the players are. So two aha moments. sports fans, they just want to win. You got to create a platform where they're always in a position to win. If they didn't win yesterday, they can win tomorrow. And then the other part is that sports fans are a global group that are interested all year long. You just have to familiarize them with who all the players are, and then they just become a year round. They become a year round global fan. And in a way, if you think about it, it's not like it's not very different than what ESPN or NBC Sports do. I mean, they obviously cater to people who are fans of lots of different sports. The difference is we make it interactive and we make it personal.
So the payoff from a human nature competitive side, where do you see this at some point? Does there have to be a financial payoff, do you think, for this to grow, or some type of premium that they could cash in? Or do you see this just as a continuing to grow with collecting points and competing against your buddies and being able to share that information on social media?
I think it's, I'd like to say we're open to all kinds of things. And I think different players are interested in different things, but I would, I point to just, video games and mobile games in general. They don't pay out any money, but they certainly engage people, and people certainly spend money on it. So I don't believe that there needs to be a cash payout for people to be interested. And we've obviously demonstrated that repeatedly in our game projects. And we've done that here too, in that we don't pay out any real cash, but we get the same exact level of engagement and spend, frankly, that you would in a traditional game. And so, I think I would never, I think we're open to anything that engages people, but I don't think there needs to be, I mean, I'm sure that there doesn't need to be any kind of a cash payout in order for people to be interested. I think what does have to be there, though, is a really good, competitive experience where people feel like it's fair and they have a shot. And if they work hard and put the right team together, they will be rewarded with a win. I think we need to build a community in there so that, this isn't something that people do on their own. I think when you make it about money, it's really, it's you against the world. I think when you make it about, kind of pride and glory, you become a lot more cooperative in that.
Right.
And so, I don't believe that, the payoff is going to come in the form of cash. I think the payoff is going to come in the form of success and victory, and friends that you make in the process, and the time that you invest. Because again, your performance and your records go year over year. The community and the team that you build go from sport to sport, and so I think it becomes like anything else. It just becomes a community that you're a part of. And the value that you get out of it is just your kind of, your place in that group.
Right. So how do people find the app and download the app and start using it today?
App Store, Google Play Store, just Hip Sports. It'll probably be the first thing on the list when you type it in. I will tell everybody it is, it's available. It works, and it's, but it's very much a work in progress. And so we update often. We try to put out a new update roughly every 2 weeks with, really big features and stuff. And we're always, listening to what the players are telling us about what they like and what they'd like to see, improved. We're an incredibly responsive group. And one of the other things that we constantly get kind of praised for by our players is just the fact that they can ask a question and within 5 minutes, one of the founders is responding to them with trying to address either their problem or listen to their suggestions. So, anybody that does download it, I would invite them to, get involved and be active if they have any, thoughts or suggestions.
Well, I downloaded it and I've been using it now for a couple weeks, and I love it. It's really cool. I turned 2 of my sons onto it as well. So, yeah, it's super, super cool. One of them's 8 years old, and he has it on his iPad. Nice. And the other one's 19. And
Nice.
yeah, it's. I mean, at the end of the day, especially for all my listeners, and when you look at your history, and you guys, and you and your team, your group of college buddies, have put together, been behind on some of the most iconic brands and properties and platforms within the digital space. and you guys were right there at the beginning, whether it was deer shooting hunters or Tiger Woods out there in some iconic locations. I mean, we've all played these games growing up, and you guys are the ones that are behind the scenes that no one always knows who they are unless you're in the industry. But now you guys are disrupting the marketplace again, with what your aha moments are and where you see the need in the marketplace. So there's no doubt that this platform is going to be as successful as some of the other projects you guys have worked on. So I mean, 25 years, you guys have just been crushing it. And I don't see why that wouldn't happen now. And it's a great. Like I said, it's a great app. We, as my sons and I, all of us are gamers, and we love it. And we definitely have spent some time on it. They're a little bit more focused on the soccer side of it than I am. Nice. And I think that's because they play a lot of FIFA and they love it. So sure. Anyways, so
awesome.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for your time, and I really enjoyed it. You've enlightened me to a lot of what's happening in the space and the history of where you guys have come up and what you've been able to accomplish. So congratulations. I think this is just another chapter in the book of the Fab Five, and, plus a couple extra stragglers in there, and really super talented people, and the things that I'm sure you guys have been able to accomplish have just been outstanding and stay together as a group. So, Mike Taramykin, I got it right that time. Tell me I got it right that time.
Exactly.
Yeah, with Hip Sports and the Hip Sports Group, or the Hip Group, Hip Games, I'm sorry, and Hip Sports exactly. is the first one that's being let out in there, and is it hipgame.com?
It's just hipsports.com.
Hipsports.com is how you guys can.
Sports.
HYPsports.com. You can find it online, so take a look at it. So I think we covered a lot today, and I know it's been a great conversation on my end. So thank you again for joining us, Mike.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So this is Rob Thompson Live, interview with influencers. This has been tons of nuggets of information, and we look forward to spending more time becoming the stars in the global world of hip